Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and today we're going to actually be continuing our Doctrine and Organisation series, and today we're going to be looking at the Dominion. Now, initially I didn't really plan on doing it, partially because I feel that Dominion Doctrine is rather self-explanatory. I think if you've watched any Battle Space episodes, it's really quite apparent, or I feel as apparent, certainly granted it's apparent to me in my head, but a few people have asked, and I feel like maybe it is worth going into a bit more depth and detail over it. So that's what we'll be doing today. It really shouldn't take long, it's not that complicated. So obviously, the most common ship in the Dominion fleet is the Gemhadar Fighter, and essentially, that is the basis on which they build their doctrine. The doctrine is actually very similar. It's because it is essentially swarm tactics. The doctrine is very similar to Klingon doctrine. It's very aggressive and it's very mobile, but there are some key differences in how it actually plays out. So you have the fighters, and they are the primary weapon of a Dominion fleet. And there's contrast with the Klingons. While the Klingons do have a lot of birds of prey, the birds of prey are the support unit for whatever they're attached to, unless they're just among themselves, unless it's just a bird of prey wing, but otherwise they're likely there to support whatever the other ship they're attached to is. This is not the case for the Jem'hadar, and I'll get into that. The Jem'hadar fighters are obviously armed with a polaron beam and 6 torpedo tubes. Now, without getting too technical and getting into a ship chat, it appears that the polaron beam is vastly favoured over the torpedo launchers. I suspect that the torpedoes are, bear in mind it's a very small ship, the torpedo launchers are perhaps only one shot, or very slow reloading, and that's why you have multiple tubes. I can't see any other reason otherwise for such a small ship that they're just single-use launchers. But yes, and you essentially have your single polaron beam at the front of the ship, and that is very clearly their favoured weapon. It's got good range. It allows this small ship to actually have a good range and accuracy, which contrasts with most other small attack ships. So it gives it the ability to not only engage and destroy other attack ships, but also larger ships. It's a very powerful beam. Even without the shield penetrating effects, it's still very potent. It's probably equivalent, if not a little bit more powerful than the Type 10 phaser, but it's very powerful for a small ship. And in this, we see the first level of Dominion Doctrine, and why it is built in the way that it is, why it is organised in this particular way. And so the smallest level, the smallest unit that we will see in the Dominion fleet is a squadron, and that is 3 Gemhadar fighters. Now, the reason it is 3 specifically is you want to have a minimum size possible in order to maximise flexibility and manoeuvrability and simplicity for the commander, but that is the minimum size at which you can maintain a consistent barrage. One of the drawbacks of the polaron beam is that because it is so powerful, particularly on this small ship, it needs a longer recharge time than usual. So in order to compensate, you have them in groups of 3, and this means that one Gemhadar fighter is always firing on a target. Bear in mind, of course, that you're going to be concentrating that fire on generally a single large target, like a cruiser or even battleship. And so in so doing, you're actually gaining fire superiority, because chances are they're going to only be able to shoot back at one of you, particularly if you're very effective in your manoeuvring. The Jem'hadar fighters are going to be able to, they will be able to deliver concentrated fire while dispersing enemy fire. And so that's really what's at the core of Dominion Doctrine, and that goes all the way up in how the Jem'hadar carry this through. Now, a squadron is generally going to be commanded by a Vorta. Now, I should mention there's no official titles, as far as I can tell, nor are Dominion ships named, they are simply numbered. So, actually identifying individual ships and units is very difficult, because the Dominion don't really care about that. So, A squadron will be commanded by a Vorta, generally a minor Vorta. This then brings us up to what happens when you put 3 squadrons together. Rule of 3 is very useful. 3 is roughly manageable for one person. Now, this does vary, but 3 is about manageable. And that brings us to the battle group. So you have 3 squadrons, and they will generally be led by a battle cruiser. Now, I say led by a battle cruiser, and that's not really accurate, because that suggests that the battle cruiser will be going forward with them. They will be supported and coordinated by the battle cruiser. They will not be followed in by the battle cruiser. Battle cruisers are pretty good and pretty maneuverable for its size, but it is much larger than the Gemhadar fighters and can't keep up. But its job is not to keep up. And this is, again, big contrast with Klingon Doctrine. In Klingon Doctrine, the Votcha and the Bird of Prey attack together as one, and the Votcha lead the charge. And that is the complete opposite to what the Dominion do. The battle cruiser hangs back, and the Jem'hadar fighters go in. That then also again has the effect of, once again, concentrating fire and dispersing the fire of the enemy by posing multiple targets, particularly with the fighters. They'll be attacking at generally mid to close range, while the battle cruiser has the capacity to engage the enemy in long-range fire with its torpedoes. So the fighters engage and distract the enemy and swarm the enemy, overwhelm them, disrupt them, and therefore allow the battle cruiser to safely fire away from long range without being overwhelmed. Now, if someone does try and press the battle cruiser, again, the fighters can be easily hug the battle cruiser, stick close to it, and again, help provide concentrated fire. So they're very flexible in supporting one another under this doctrine and organization. But the command does lie on the battle cruiser, not on the fighters. And in terms of who would be commanding, again, you're looking at a major Vorta. Vorta are specifically bred for certain roles, and so there will be certain Vorta that are bred for that role, rather than promoted to the role. Maybe someone like Yelgren. I don't know. I don't know how that works, but essentially that's what a Jem'hadar battle group looks like. 10 ships, 9 fighters, 1 battle cruiser, and the fighters are the primary unit, not the battle cruiser. The battle cruiser is the support unit, and that's a very big contrast. And then really all you get to that from there is higher groupings, and that's very flexible and changeable. It will generally be as and what the Dominion require. Vorta are much more capable of mental discipline than humans and organization, and so they're much more able to coordinate and keep track of multiple different things going on at once. So a larger Jem'hadar grouping, which we'll call a division, to put it into its equivalent of the Cardassians, would be anywhere between 30 and 50 ships, roughly, whatever the Vorta can manage. And again, you're looking at a higher level Vorta in control of that. This is an element of the fleet that will operate as perhaps a mobile force, that will split off and join with other fleets, that will intermingle with, say, Cardassian units and go and support them. This is the kind of level where you're doing that, is at the divisional level. So once again, there's not really much to say about it, but it's just the same tactics iterated further. And again, it's really whatever scenario, whatever enemy they're facing, they can alter their tactics. So maybe against the Klingons, they want to be a little bit more cautious, hold back, draw the Klingons out, and exploit their greater firepower. Compare that to engaging the Federation, where they're more likely to actually want to be more aggressive, to swarm them, overwhelm them, sweep in, punch through the line, get around them, use their speed and maneuverability to overwhelm the Federation. So you can see that these units are very adaptable, and that's the essence of Dominion Doctrine, is its simplicity. And because it is so simple, it can be so easily adapted. The organization is so basic, it leaves room for most contingencies. It's not really refined to any singular purpose in the way that, say, a Klingon fleet is focused on conducting maneuver warfare in a lightning campaign, making lightning strikes through the enemy line, or say the Cardassian fleet, which is focused on making a consistent linear advance. What gives the Dominion their strength is that they can adapt to any one of those tactics and use them if they want, but also counter them very easily because of how simple their doctrine is. They're not limited by having to accommodate a big variety of ships with very specific specializations. Now, this just brings us to the fleet level, which is anywhere between, it's generally larger, it's going to be anywhere between 100 to 150 ships, or anywhere between 90 to 150 ships. As you can see, a lot of variation there. Ships can be given and taken, and a lot of the time they're splitting off sections of their fleet to support their Cardassian or Breen allies. What the nominal strength of that fleet is them, and they are commanded by, of course, a hive author. Someone like Weyoun is a very good example. And again, the Dominion fleet, in terms of how it operates, it again depends on who their enemy is. They might be more aggressive or defensive depending on who they are. But broadly, given the flexibility and the mobility that the Dominion fleet normally has a significant, because of how simple the fleet is, it can be very mobile and can move very quickly. And so the Dominion do often favour in attack maneuver warfare, because they can get around enemy fleets very quickly, they can get through gaps very quickly, and they have the resources to back it up. The Dominion are not foolish. They're not going to attack the strongest part of their enemy. They are going to try and bypass the enemy as and when they can, but they do equally have the strength to punch through. Now, I'll briefly mention, of course, the Dominion battleships. There are only a handful, if that, of Dominion battleships that are ever built. And they are generally assigned on a sector basis, and generally you'll have a pair. It was intended that you'd have basically a pair of battleships for each front. Now, they can be concentrated together as and when the needs require, such as in the Battle of the Giants, where they actually send 4 battleships to face down the Romulans. But generally, they're going to be split up across the different fronts. Again, just in terms of organization of a battleship group, you're just looking at a single battleship supported by some Gemhadar fighters. You don't need any attached cruisers. It's got that sort of aspect covered, but it does, and this does actually contrast a little bit with the normal Dominion battle group, because of course the normal Dominion battle groups, the fighters are the aggressive element. The battleship is the primary unit. It is calling the shots, and its escorts need to stick to it like glue. And that is critical, absolutely critical, because those escorts are there to protect the battleship, because it is too big to fully take care of itself. The battlecruiser, by contrast, sits in a sort of a happy middle, where it is able to manage most threats, not all, but most threats sufficiently, whereas the battleship cannot, and thus needs that additional support. So yeah, but that is essentially Dominion Fleet Doctrine. Like I say, it's very simple, very basic essence doctrine, but that is the kind of the governing ideas behind how they operate during the Dominion War, and that is really the doctrine that is dictating their actions. And I call it doctrine, but it's so, as you can see, so open that it's more just a basic level of, it's just organization, and it's a very basic, simple system that allows for a very simple but large fleet doctrine that revolves around using these aggressive swarm tactics. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to thank my members, in particular, Commander David Reeves, Jeff Hallam, Martin McConville, Captain's Quarters, Miami Jules, Chase Rector, and PQSK, as well as my Centurions, Nathaniel Mead, Arian Fulton, Pendlebury, BOS Domestic Disputes, Tully DT, and Adam Bowman. Thank you guys for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.